These are devotions for people at a social distance. Once again, today, in my personal devotions, I found myself reading a passage from the Bible that seemed to be ripped from the daily headlines. This is Samuel chapter 16, starting at the beginning. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul? I've rejected him from being king over Israel." So people being aggrieved, being upset over the loss of a former leader of a country because they have been deselected, in this case not by a democracy but by the one vote, the vote of God that counts, but people being aggrieved over that loss and not being able to get past it. And God comes to Samuel and said, "Are you going to get over this grief at this loss?" Now, I would read a little bit of caution into how you interpret this passage. Grief in itself is a good thing. I mean, when you have suffered a loss, whether it be a personal loss or some other kind of significant loss in your life, grief is a process that you need to go through, that you need to work through. And I think it's important to say that grief takes what it takes. So, different people are different, but whenever you're going through a time of grief, you need to allow the time that you need to fully process that grief. So I would not necessarily read into what God says to Saul here, an impatience with Saul simply with the process of grief. He's lost the leader that he loved, that he cared for. God is not impatient because he doesn't understand that Samuel needs to go through a certain process here. No, God is upset because there is a malignancy that has come into what he is doing here, because he is unwilling to go forward. And of course, that's what we see, that people be upset at a lost election. That's fine. You need to vent your feelings and deal with your feelings. But when that becomes malignant, especially in the case where you have people rioting over it, that's not good processing of grief. There's something wrong here. And so there are times when we don't work through it properly, where it becomes malignant and it becomes a problem and it becomes a real serious issue. So that's where Samuel is, and God calls him on it. So there's a definite connection to what's going on here today. But on the more personal level, of course, the issue that what we're all dealing with in terms of the loss of normal life that we're all dealing with in these days, as we need to to follow instructions and not socialize and not do things that we normally would love to be doing. There is a grief at the loss of that. And yes, our feelings of grief over that, our sadness over that, are completely legitimate. And we need to work through those feelings and address those feelings. But we cannot allow that to become a malignant thing. And we cannot allow that to get in the way of allowing us to embrace the new world that God is calling us to. The world is changing, my friends. God is calling us to live out the gospel in a new way. And if we're just stuck here saying, I'm just so upset because I can't live it out in the old way, we are missing the moment where we need to be right now. And that's what God calls Samuel on. And we may need to be called on it as well. Lord our God, we are dealing with grief and loss. Many people in the world are dealing with grief and loss in various ways, and sometimes in very malignant ways. Help us to properly and healthfully deal with our grief and our loss and embrace the newness. Be willing to give the newness that you are calling us to a chance, as hard as that might be. Amen.